In the summer of 1944, the atmosphere in Europe was charged with the promise of change as Allied forces made significant strides against the Axis powers. This period marked a turning point in the war, as the Allies, comprising primarily American, British, Canadian, and other nations' troops, launched major offensives to reclaim occupied territories. As they moved deeper into Europe, the pressures of war rested heavily on the shoulders of leaders like President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. They not only dealt with military strategies, but also with the lives and hopes of countless soldiers and civilians who sought an end to the conflict. Roosevelt, from the United States, and Churchill, from the United Kingdom, worked closely together, understanding that their decisions would shape the future of Europe and the world. The stakes were high. They needed to balance the urgency of military action with the complexities of global politics. Every decision carried the weight of history, and both leaders were acutely aware that they had to act decisively. In June 1944, the D-Day invasion, officially known as Operation Overlord, was a monumental step forward. It involved a massive assault on Nazi-occupied France, with thousands of troops storming the beaches of Normandy. This operation was one of the largest amphibious military assaults in history, showcasing the Allies' determination to push back against the Axis powers. The landings were fraught with danger, and the losses were immense, but they succeeded in establishing a vital foothold in Europe. Following the landings, the Allies faced numerous challenges as they moved inland. They encountered fierce German resistance, and as they advanced, the need for effective coordination and strategy became even more critical. Military leaders, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who served as the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, were under constant scrutiny. They had to make quick decisions, often with limited information, to adapt to the dynamic battlefield. Back in Washington and London, Roosevelt and Churchill constantly communicated about the situation on the ground. They discussed troop movements, resource allocations, and the importance of maintaining momentum. With every piece of intelligence received, their strategies were reassessed, and plans were laid out. As summer progressed, the Allies pushed further into France, liberating towns and cities that had suffered under German occupation for years. The exhilaration of victory contrasted sharply with the grim realities of war. Every advance brought stories of sacrifice and loss. Civilians welcomed their liberators, often risking their own lives to aid the soldiers, and their determination inspired the troops. The pressure for a swift conclusion to the war loomed large over Roosevelt and Churchill. They realized that the longer the conflict continued, the more lives would be lost on all sides. In discussions, both leaders emphasized the importance of unifying the Allied forces to maintain their offensive and to prevent any splits among the nations involved. Public support for the war effort was crucial. Propaganda campaigns aimed to keep morale high, showcasing victories to inspire hope and determination among the troops and citizens alike. Leaders knew that the collective spirit of the nations involved was vital for sustaining their commitment to victory. Through all these challenges, the leadership of Roosevelt and Churchill was instrumental. They worked tirelessly, knowing that with each decision they made, they were not merely strategizing for military victory, but laying the groundwork for a new world order following the war. Their collaboration during this critical time reflected a shared vision for peace and stability, a vision that would one day become a foundation for rebuilding Europe. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the situation was heating up as the Soviet Union mounted a fierce counteroffensive against the German forces. The Red Army, which had suffered heavy losses in the early years of the war, was now gaining ground, pushing the Germans back with a series of successful campaigns. Key victories, such as the Battle of Stalingrad and the Battle of Kursk, had bolstered Soviet morale and showcased their determination to drive out the invaders. As the Soviet forces advanced, Allied leaders noticed that the dynamics of the war were changing. With the Germans stretched thin on multiple fronts, the question arose: could a more united strategy with the Soviets help expedite Germany's defeat? Discussions among leaders in Washington, London, and Moscow intensified around the idea of coordinating efforts more closely. The idea behind this collaboration was simple: If the Allies could work together effectively, they could increase pressure on German forces from both the West and the East. This would not only weaken the German military, but also potentially lead to a quicker end to the war. Optimism grew, as it seemed that a coordinated offensive could bring the long-awaited victory closer. During meetings between Roosevelt, Churchill, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, plans for a bold offensive began to take shape. The leaders exchanged ideas about joint military operations and how they could support each other's efforts. Churchill, in particular, was keen on ensuring that the Western Allies provided material and supplies to the Soviets to aid their campaigns. It was a delicate balancing act, as they had to navigate their differing aims and interests in a post-war Europe. Conversations revolved around the logistics of a coordinated push against Germany. The Allied forces in the West were gearing up for further operations, while the Soviets prepared to exploit their recent successes. There was a shared sense of urgency. The longer the war dragged on, the greater the toll it would take on all involved. However, forming a united strategy wasn't without its challenges. There were deep-seated suspicions and differing ideologies between the Allies and the Soviets. Many in the West were wary of Stalin's ambitions and his vision for Eastern Europe post-war. Despite these concerns, the immediate goal of defeating Germany overshadowed other issues. The leaders recognized that teamwork was essential for achieving their common objective. As plans solidified, the Red Army prepared for its next stage of the offensive, while Western allies mobilized for increased support. The hope was that a powerful push from both the East and the West could lead to a decisive victory, diminish German resistance, and bring a swifter conclusion to the war. In this critical moment, the collaboration between the Allied leaders became a symbol of unity in a time of dire strife. The stakes were high, but the commitment to work together for a common cause illustrated an understanding that defeating tyranny was paramount. The world watched with bated breath, anticipating the outcomes of these ambitious plans. The potential offensive the Allied leaders envisioned aimed to strike deep into Germany's heartland. The goal was clear: target key cities and industrial centers to cripple the German war machine. By disrupting their ability to produce weapons and supplies, the Allies hoped to hasten Germany's defeat. However, such an ambitious plan didn't come without challenges. It required massive resources, troops, equipment, and supplies that the Allies would need to gather and coordinate. The logistics of moving so many forces across various fronts was a daunting task, and the need for unity and collaboration among the Allied nations became essential. As discussions progressed, disagreements began to simmer beneath the surface. Not all leaders were in favor of fully committing to this bold offensive right away. Some believed that the Allies should stick to their current methodical approach, gradually pushing back German forces rather than launching headlong into a risky, expansive operation. These differing opinions added tension to meetings among Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. Churchill, who had a long history of military strategy, felt that a decisive strike was necessary, not just to weaken Germany, but also to boost morale among the troops and citizens back home. He believed that a bold move would send a strong message that the Allies were united and determined. On the other hand, some military leaders within the Allied command were more cautious. They were concerned about overextending the forces, especially given the harsh experiences of earlier campaigns. Fear of high casualties weighed heavily, as many remembered the devastating losses from previous battles. The debates over strategy were filled with passion and urgency. Everyone present understood that whatever decision was made could shape the war's outcome. Each leader had to consider not just the military implications, but also the political fallout. They weighed the risks of failure against the potential rewards of a successful offensive. Ultimately, they recognized that coordination was crucial. If they decided to proceed with the offensive, they would need clear communication and a shared plan among all Allied nations. This meant aligning their air support, ground troops, and supply lines to ensure that they could respond quickly and effectively to any challenges that arose. As plans were drawn and strategies discussed, the pressure to come to a consensus grew. Time was precious, and the Allies knew that Germany was not standing still. They were regrouping and preparing for further resistance. The fate of the war hung in the balance, and every choice made would have significant consequences. In the end, the leadership in the Allies sought to find a middle ground, aiming to blend cautious planning with the boldness needed to hit Germany hard. The agreement was to continue the steady advances while preparing for that crucial deep strike when the opportunity arose. This compromise reflected the complex dynamics of leadership during wartime, as they navigated both strategy and diplomacy in their quest for victory. As discussions progressed among the Allied leaders, intelligence reports began to raise alarms about a possible German counteroffensive. These reports suggested that the Germans were regrouping and preparing to launch an attack of their own. The threat was serious enough to cause concern among some of the leaders, leading to heated debates about their next steps. Many Allied commanders and strategists worried that a large-scale offensive at this moment might be risky. They feared that if they miscalculated, it could backfire, leading to disastrous consequences. Instead of gaining ground, the Allies could find themselves in a vulnerable position, allowing German forces to push them back and prolong the war even further. Voices of caution grew louder. Some leaders argued that the Allies should focus on solidifying their current positions and reinforcing their troops before making any grand moves. They believed that taking time to build strength and assess the situation could prevent heavy losses and safeguard their gains. Roosevelt, at times, found himself caught between the aggressive push for an offensive and the warnings from military experts. He understood the urgency, but also recognized the importance of careful planning. This was a moment to weigh the pros and cons, and he knew that the lives of many soldiers were at stake. While some leaders pushed for action, others pointed to the need for better intelligence and reconnaissance to confirm the German military's intentions. They argued that understanding the enemy's movements would be crucial before launching any bold attacks. This call for caution highlighted the complexities of warfare, where the balance between boldness and caution could change the course of events dramatically. Despite the tension, they all agreed on one thing: they could not afford to overlook the possibility of a German counterstrike. The memory of past failures served as a sobering reminder of the stakes involved. Discussions grew intense as leaders weighed their options, continuing to grapple with the question of whether waiting for a clearer understanding of the German response would be the wisest choice. In the end, it became clear that the decision to proceed would require a consensus. They needed to ensure that whatever offensive was planned was rooted in careful consideration and robust intelligence. The potential for German resistance loomed large, and the Allies knew that they had to proceed with their eyes wide open. The delicate dance of strategy continued, with every leader hopeful that their next move would lead them closer to a hard-earned victory. Ultimately, after much debate and consideration, the decision was made to take a more cautious approach in the face of the evolving situation. Allied leaders felt that waiting and reinforcing their positions was the safest plan, hoping it would lead to a stronger offensive later. This choice, however, resulted in a drawn-out conflict that stretched through the summer and into the fall of 1944. While the Allies managed to achieve victories in several key battles during this period, such as the liberation of Paris and advances into Belgium, the chance for a quicker resolution to the war seemed to slip away. Each small success was overshadowed by the understanding that they could have moved more decisively, potentially breaking the backbone of the German resistance sooner. This hesitation to act boldly has haunted historians ever since. Many have debated what might have happened if the Allies had committed to a more aggressive strategy earlier on. Would they have been able to cut through Germany's defenses before the enemy could regroup? Would the war have ended sooner, sparing countless lives? These questions linger, illustrating the complexities and risks involved in wartime decision-making. As the conflict dragged on, the toll on both soldiers and civilians grew heavier. The brutal realities of war made it clear that every decision carried weight, and the costs of inaction became increasingly evident. Despite the success in reclaiming territory, the uncertainty of the next phases of the war left many Allied leaders feeling uneasy. With each passing month, the pressure mounted to find a pathway to victory. The cautious approach meant that Allied forces had to maintain high levels of readiness and resource allocation without knowing precisely when the moment for a decisive offensive would come. The anxieties about insufficient momentum became palpable within the ranks. In retrospect, the decision to hold back for fear of failure highlights the difficulty of leadership during wartime. As soldiers continued to fight in grim conditions, the hope for a more rapid end to the war became a topic of constant reflection. Many understood that while caution played a role in avoiding calamity, it also meant the conflict would continue to wreak havoc across Europe. As the year came to a close, discussions about strategy only intensified. The Allies knew that winter would bring new challenges, and the time for significant action was fast approaching. The discussions continued, and history awaited their next move, eager to see if the Allies would finally seize the chance for a decisive victory or remain ensnared in the throes of a prolonged struggle. As 1945 approached, the war showed no signs of slowing down. The fighting continued, and the casualties on all sides were staggering. Soldiers and civilians alike faced unimaginable hardships, with families torn apart and cities reduced to rubble. The relentless grind of war took its toll, and the quest for victory seemed both urgent and daunting. The Allies did manage to achieve significant victories, gradually pushing the Germans back and reclaiming more territory. However, as the months passed, many people began to ponder the what-ifs. What if a single risky decision had been made earlier in the war? Some believed that if the Allies had acted more boldly at critical moments, it could have altered the course of the conflict, potentially saving millions of lives from the devastation yet to come. This reflection became a poignant reminder of how pivotal decisions can shape history. Leaders faced constant pressure to weigh their choices carefully. The consequences of their actions or inactions were starkly visible all around them. Each battle finished with stories of courage and loss, and each victory came with the heavy price of human lives. By early 1945, the scene on the Eastern Front was changing dramatically, with the Soviet Union launching powerful offensives that pushed deep into German territory. In the West, Allied forces also pressed forward, determined to end the war once and for all. The combination of efforts meant that a sense of victory was finally within reach, though at a terrible cost. The discussions among leaders about strategy and tactics continued. While they celebrated their successes, the haunting thought of past hesitations lingered. Many wondered if more decisive actions in previous years could have led to an earlier end to the war. The toll of the conflict had been immense, with a legacy of loss that would resonate for generations. As they moved into the final months of the war, the Allies knew that while victory was close, the sacrifices made by so many were a heavy burden. History was watching closely, waiting to see how decisions taken in these final days would shape the future. The realization that a single choice could change the world weighed heavily on their minds, underscoring the responsibility that accompanied leadership in such tumultuous times.